Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Utility Sports. Today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Houston Rockets, the absolute mess that is going on there with the absence of Christian Wood. That has completely derailed their season. There's also reports that Victor Oladipo has recently turned down a 2-year, $45 million contract extension with the Rockets. I was very critical of the Houston Rockets in their acquisition of Victor Oladipo and their pursuit of a James Harden trade. I think that they got absolutely taken advantage of in that deal with the Brooklyn Nets. We've seen how great the Brooklyn Nets have been with James Harden there. Yes, they got the picks. Sure, they got the pick swaps. But at the end of the day, they didn't get a young player that's going to really have an impact on this Rockets roster. We don't know who's going to be there, who's not going to be there moving forward. The Rockets have dropped multiple games in a row here. They've been playing so terribly without Christian Wood. Sure, they had a 6-game winning streak when they first got this whole band together. Everyone started buying stock into it. I don't know why. There was nothing on this roster that indicates this is a team that can go anywhere in the playoffs, even if they did slip in. And now without Christian Wood, their best player, it's showing how weak they are in a lot of different areas. They just don't have the right roster construction there, and they're getting absolutely blown out today by the Memphis Grizzlies. We see them at 11-20 this year. They're 14th in the Western Conference. And if Minnesota wasn't so terrible this year with Karl Anthony Towns missing so much time, they'd probably be dead last in the Western Conference. This team is an absolute dumpster fire at this point, and they have to make some moves to right the wrongs that they have there in Houston. It's time for a full-on rebuild there for the Houston Rockets. I've been saying this. I'm going to say it again. They need to look to the future starting right now. They need to move on from a lot of the guys that they have on the roster. They have 2 players there that I think that they can keep around, maybe try and build up with, and the rest of it's got to get torn down. But before we jump into what those moves are going to look like, I just want to remind you guys, make sure to hit that like button if you are new. Hit that subscribe button. We're just about at 2,000 subscribers. We would appreciate it so much if you guys could be number 2,000 here on the channel. We love all the support you guys have been giving us. And now let's jump into the moves here. Actually, real quick, I want to talk about the roster, who I think those 2 guys are. It's one, obviously, Christian Wood. I was very high on him. I thought he could be the most improved player in the league. This year, he's certainly looked like it when he had been healthy. His injury couldn't come at a worse time for the Houston Rockets. And the other guy, no, it's not John Wall. However, I do think he will be tied with Houston for the foreseeable future. His contract's just too big to move. But that other guy is Kevin Porter Jr. I was very critical of other teams in the NBA as well. They gave up a pick that's top 55 protected in the draft to get Kevin Porter Jr. the rights to him, a former first-round pick, a guy who can put the ball in the hoop. At the end of the day, that's what basketball is really all about, is scoring the basketball. And Kevin Porter Jr. can do that. He has been balling out in the G League bubble there. He's averaging well over 20 points a game. He's had a triple-double there for the Rio Grande Valley Vipers, and he has been absolutely wonderful. He's been a very, very nice addition into the bubble there, and I think the Rockets need to take a direction where not only do they get him up onto the big league team here with the Houston Rockets, but they need to start featuring him in their offense. He's going to be the guy that has the potential to maybe turn this thing around there in Houston. I want to see him play with Christian Wood. I want to see Porter Jr. and Christian Wood work a pick and roll together, especially if I'm Houston's GM and if I'm Steven Silas, who's a heavy pick and roll head coach. I want to see what Kevin Porter Jr. can really do on an NBA floor when he's given 35 minutes a night, knows he's going to have the ball in his hands. I think that there's great things that could come from Kevin Porter Jr. if you instill the confidence in him that he's going to be the guy at least short term and tell him, hey, we're riding you from start to finish. We're going to let you make decisions. We're going to let you run the guard position for us. I think he could be a really, really quality player in the NBA, and I think the Rockets have to take that move right now. I think that they have to start putting the ball in his hands. This season's lost. I know they're only 11-20. It's early on, but they're not coming back from this. Not in the West. They're not crawling back. They need to look to the future, and it's Kevin Porter Jr. that they've got to put the ball in his hands and really ride the ship with him. So how do they get there? This first move, it's moving on from Victor Oladipo. I don't understand why they took him in. Karis LeVert, who I'm not even necessarily high on, I thought that he made a lot more sense into their future than Oladipo did. Oladipo's 2 years older, coming off of injuries, didn't have a contract in place for next season, and now we're starting to see the ramifications of it. Here is the fit. The Boston Celtics, they have a $28.5 million trade exception. They can take in Oladipo. They might even be able to take in another player like Daniil House, who could be out on here. If you're a Celtics fan, you think you maybe need a little bit more in this deal, that would be Daniil House going with them to the Boston Celtics. I don't know if they necessarily need that front court depth in-house, but he would be the guy to go with Oladipo in this deal. And what do the Rockets get back? They get the Celtics first round pick this year, lottery protected. The reasoning for that is that if Boston, right now at 16 and 17, they're not feeling great about where they are. They don't want to take that big of a risk on a guy. They're going to have some protection on that pick. That would probably transition into 2 second rounders if it didn't convey, but I do expect it to convey this year. The Celtics are a playoff level team. I would be very surprised if they don't make the playoffs out east. Then you also pick up Semi Ojeleye and Javonte Green. Javonte Green's 27 years old. He's not really much of a factor here. It just gives you a rotation piece for Houston. You need to have guys on the floor. Semi Ojeleye, he's a little bit younger. Maybe he's a guy who can develop into a real rotation piece moving forward for you there in Houston. And it becomes a trial period. You need to see what you have, what you can develop out of some of these guys. And Steven Silas, there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to really turn this thing around there in Houston. I really liked him as a head coach candidate. I thought he was a great assistant coach for the Dallas Mavericks. Houston was a dumpster fire with the way he inherited it, with the mess with D'Antoni, how that all ended, with the mess with Daryl Morey stepping down, also then James Harden and Russell Westbrook both wanting out. It's been a mess. The Houston Rockets are going through a whole facelift with that franchise. I think bringing in some young guys, moving on from Oladipo here to the Boston Celtics, the Celtics are going to be aggressive, looking for guys who can fit into that trade exception that they got for Gordon Hayward. Victor Oladipo is one of them. He's probably the best guy that fits in there. He fits right into them for scheme. He fits into what they're doing in terms of salary cap, and it gives them the flexibility to move on from him if it doesn't work out there in Boston. The second move for the Houston Rockets is moving PJ Tucker to another team out east, and that is the Miami Heat. Here they get back a 2027 second-round pick, the 2022 second-round pick, which is from Philadelphia or Denver, whichever pick is lower. They also get back Mo Harkless on a 1-year deal and Chris Silva on a 2-year deal. Now, I know the players they're getting there are not big impact players. Harkless maybe gets rerouted to another team that's looking for a little bit of wing depth. Chris Silva is a guy who I think maybe can be a little bit of something, gives the Rockets a little bit of front court depth as well. I don't think that he's going to be a guy that really moves the needle, though. It's ultimately about building up some of those future assets. A 2022 second and a 2027 second gives you some flexibility in trade discussions moving forward. Their GM obviously is very into acquiring draft picks there. He talked about the 4 pick swaps and the 4 firsts that they got in the deal for James Harden being the best kind of currency. Here, you're adding 2 more picks into the mix here after adding a first this year from the Celtics. You add 2 more here. Yes, they're second rounders, but they are still some value to NBA teams. And I think that there could be a good point there for the Houston Rockets to bring in some pieces for a guy that they're not going to be retaining in the Miami Heat here. PJ Tucker makes all the sense in the world. They're missing Jay Crowder this year. Now you get a guy who can sit in the corner, hit some threes. He's a versatile defender, plays physical, fits right into that Heat culture. I think PJ Tucker going to Miami makes more sense than anywhere else in the NBA, especially with Giannis now under contract. The Miami Heat are going to be looking about fleshing out this roster for the next 2-3 years, and PJ Tucker is the best option for them. And the last deal here for the Houston Rockets is with the New York Knicks. They're sending another player out east, and this one was the hardest one for me to find a deal on. Eric Gordon. He's under contract for quite a while yet. I don't see a lot of teams really wanting to take in his value. That's why this package isn't that good back to them. Alec Burks on an expiring deal. Frank Ntilikina on an expiring deal. They're going to have to probably pay him the qualifying offer. There's a chance he could take it. There's also a chance that he plays pretty solid for them, and then they have to pay him. I don't know really which way that's going to go. Ntilikina, though, is a low-end prospect at this point in his career. I just don't really see a lot from him. I think he's a versatile defender, and that's about it. Ignas Brazdeikis, he's a younger guy. He's 22 years old. Maybe you try and see if you got something there, develop him up. The key thing is you're getting some young players. They had already focused on filling in their front court with the other 2 deals. They get some backcourt help as well. And then they get a 2023 second-round pick from Utah. And here again, it even says that they're getting better by trading Eric Gordon. I don't believe that to be the case. I think that Eric Gordon is one of those guys who his player efficiency rating isn't necessarily indicative of how good of a player he can be. And the Knicks here, they're capitalizing on how well they played. They're 4th in the Eastern Conference right now, 17-17. We've already seen them make a buy move on Derrick Rose. Now, why not bring in Eric Gordon? They need a little bit more bench scoring. They need another guy who can get his own shot. Eric Gordon is that for the New York Knicks. And I don't necessarily love this for the Knicks, but I think they were the most sensible spot for Eric Gordon, especially when you look at what they're giving up. An asset that doesn't come in for 2 more drafts after this one, a guy who's on an expiring deal. It's basically a straight upgrade from Alec Burks into Eric Gordon, in my opinion. And you have some team control on him. Maybe if he plays well, you can flip him again later. But these are the 3 deals that I think the Houston Rockets have to make. And it's all about opening up some time for Kevin Porter Jr. to get the ball in his hands in the NBA. Let him play. Him and John Wall, they're going to have to work off of each other. But I think you sit down with John Wall and tell him, hey, we're looking to really try and start this thing around. Maybe try and help negotiate a buyout there. An amnesty waive or a stretch and waive would be absolutely terrible for the franchise. They cannot afford to do that at this point. That would really handcuff them for probably the next decade or so. But at this point, it looks like maybe a buyout there, or possibly try and find a trade, but you're going to have to take in another terrible contract. That might be a Blake Griffin type thing with Detroit. I don't know if you really want to go into doing something like that either. I think at this point, Houston's going to be stuck with John Wall, or they're going to have to buy him out, which is never a situation you really want to have to go down with a player of that magnitude, that expensive price tag that he has as well. And here it's going to be about trying to bring in as many assets as you can, flesh out this roster completely, rebuild around Christian Wood, and I think Kevin Porter Jr. has to be a part of your long-term plans with how their season has gone so far. It's just not salvageable. I think Kevin Porter Jr. is their best chance to get back on track long-term at this point. And obviously, they're going to have to figure out their picks. The issue is their pick right now, it is top 4 protected to Oklahoma City, but if they don't get lucky in the lottery here, or if they do just finish right outside the top 4, that pick goes to Oklahoma City. They don't have that pick. That makes this rebuild even tougher. In a really strong draft class, they don't have a top 4. They don't have a top pick possibly unless it lands in the top 4. Selling now gives you the best chance to get into the top 4, gives you at least a 45% chance, I'm pretty sure. If you are one of the 3 worst teams, they need to try and figure out a way to get to that point, and selling this roster is how you do it. I hope you guys did enjoy today's video. If you did, make sure to smash that like button. Let me know in the comments what you think the Houston Rockets will do and what they need to do to get this thing back on track. Thanks again, guys, so much for all the support, and we'll catch you in the very next video.